Welcome to Markstrat. This is a computer simulation where each of you and your teams will get to manage a portfolio of products. You'll get to decide what products to bring on the market, what products to pull off, how to configure the attributes of those products, what kind of customers to target, and it's all in a competitive scenario, so you'll be pitted against each other's teams. And it can get interesting since people who seek MBAs tend to have a bit of a competitive streak, in my experience at least. This video is designed to give you an introduction to the Markstrat world. So congratulations on your new position. Each team has a new job. You're now the marketing department of an electronics division within a larger corporation. You are inheriting several products that already exist and the company is already operating. You'll be selling two types of consumer durable goods. They're called the Sonites and the Vodites. They're both tech products, and I'll describe them a bit more later in detail. What you're trying to do, your goal essentially, is to maximize what Markstrat calls the share price index. That's essentially their model for the value of your company or your stock price. You and your team will be undertaking several tasks throughout the simulation. Each decision period, we'll do 8, and you can think of them as years essentially. So 8 times, your team will get together and decide what segments you want to target and how you're going to try to position your products. You're going to work with the R&D in your company to improve your products or come up with new ones. Your team will be responsible for telling the manufacturing department how many products you want to make. You'll also decide what price to put on them, how to promote them, where you want your sales force to sell them, all these kinds of things. You'll make these decisions every year. Sounds exciting, right? In this first part of the video, we'll examine the Markstrat world in a bit more detail. The Markstrat world where you're going to be operating is comprised of 80 million inhabitants. So it's maybe a quarter to a fifth of the size of the United States, just to give you a sense of it. As you can see, it's spread between urban, smaller urban, and rural. A couple of things to note. In general, it's a highly developed economy akin to the United States or a European nation. It's not an emerging market like Cambodia or Tanzania. You'll be able to obtain intel on inflation, GNP growth, and related information. I do want to point out that the currency the creators chose for this simulation is the Markstrat dollar. It's a bit unfortunate because Markstrat dollars are not the same as US dollars. So please don't get hung up on the idea that something costs 100 Markstrat dollars and that equates to 100 US dollars. That's not the case. In this simulation, each MBA team will compete against the others. And the one thing that is interesting about this simulation, which I'll explain a little bit more later, is that all teams start on equal footings in some ways, but slightly different situations in others. For instance, some of your teams may be really good at production, while others may already have a very strong sales team. And this is much more realistic than 5 teams starting in identical contexts where everyone has exactly 20% of the market and the same competencies. You'll get an annual budget each period. It's kind of like you're running a large division of a conglomerate. And so depending on how you guys did the previous year, then you'll get a budget from central corporate office every year. The minimum you'll get is around 7 million and the maximum's around 20 million. As I mentioned, there are 2 product categories, the Sonites and the Vodites. This is great for our purposes in class because they're imaginary. Thus, there's no inherent advantage to someone in the class who happens to have a background in the product. So if we had a simulation that was all about athletic shoes and someone worked for Nike, they would be inherently advantaged. You'll start by marketing 2 durable good brands comparable to electronic products known as Sonites. The Sonite market has grown over the past 20 years and is now well structured. Firms in Markstrat are likely to develop a second product type, Vodites, basically coming from a technological breakthrough made in the space industry. Both markets are completely independent in terms of demand, technology, and manufacturing. They're not complementary in any way, and there's no substitution from one to the other. You're able to introduce up to 5 brands in each one of them at a time, but more on that soon. The Sonites are defined by 6 different product attributes: number of features, design index, battery life, display size, processing power, and of course, the price. That's what's called the base price here. And you and your team will specify for your brands what you want those attributes to be. Vodites are a completely different product, and you'll see that they are defined by different attributes. resolution, energy efficiency, carbon footprint, connectivity, number of apps, and of course, you set the price. You will name your brands according to a convention, which is convenient because everybody can figure out very quickly whose brand is which team's. The first letter of the brand always corresponds with the company's name, which is a letter. It's either L, M, N, R, S, or T. So the first letter will be T in this case, T or M from teams T and M. And the second letter identifies whether the product is a sonite or a vodite. Then your team is able to pick the remaining letters. I think you can go up to a total of 7. Please do note that brand names have no influence on the market response. So if you come up with a wonderful or catchy or terrible brand name, that will not influence the results. The sonite segments are already defined for you, which is quite handy. You just need to figure out what product specifications these consumers prefer. There are 5 different segments you can target: the explorers, the pros, the shoppers, the savers, and the high earners. There's a little bit of information here on this slide, but there's quite a bit more in the materials associated with the simulation, and you'll be able to access a wealth of market research about them as well. The sonite market is somewhat mature, and you're taking over the management of pre-existing products. But for vodites, the market is wide open. There's no vodite on the market at this time. It's a blue ocean, as they say. And you get to choose whether you want to get into this industry or not. It's as though a restaurant or grocery business is considering, should we enter the meal kit industry? Should we do something peripherally related but new and different? The expected market development for vodites is very similar to what you'd see in a tech market. You've got the innovators who will try it out first, then a whole group called the early adopters, and then an even larger group called the followers, the bulk of consumers who will try something after others have tried it. Your team will get to choose where your products are sold. Remember, you're manufacturing consumer durables, so think of them like a flat panel TV. You're manufacturing them, but you don't sell them directly to consumers. You sell them to a retailer, and the retailer sells them to the consumer. Your choices regarding this middleman, or channel in Markstrat, are specialty stores, which carry a very deep collection of a narrow set of products. So an example in the context of running would be a specialty running store downtown, which only carries running shoes, gear, some gels, things related to running, and that's it. That's a specialty store. Mass merchandisers are the big box stores with which you're probably already familiar, general merchandise stores like Target or Walmart, or Dick's Sporting Goods, who sell running shoes in addition to a variety of other products. And then online stores are fully digital e-commerce platforms like Amazon. You deploy your sales team to these different channels depending on whether you think your target market shops there. Now we'll talk a little bit about how to actually manage your firm. Your objective is to maximize what Markstrat calls the share price index. It's a very complicated equation that people have tried for years to figure out unsuccessfully, and I personally don't know what it is. But it makes this whole simulation much more realistic. Because in the real world, you really don't know what drives investor sentiment and your share price. You have some idea, but think about it. CEOs of big companies are forever releasing their results or touting they've got a brand new product and it's going to be fabulous, or that they've spent a certain amount of money on R&D, all in an effort to shape the stock price. Over time, just like a CEO, you'll figure out that the share price index seems to respond more or less to profitability or bringing out a new product and so forth. In general, it's going to respond to the items that are listed here: market share, sales growth, net contribution, or profitability, basically, which is based on this year as well as cumulatively, how well you've been doing. Also, what are your prospects for the future? What are you spending on R&D, for instance? These contribute to your share price index. Part of the challenge that you will face is that Markstrat creates a situation where your team can access boundless information, a plethora of data, copious research. This, of course, comes with a warning that you can spend an immense amount of time lost in the data. My advice about what you should do is to try to figure out a strategy and then work backwards and say, well, what information do we need to know that will help us figure out if our strategy is a good idea? If you start in the data, you'll probably spend an incredible amount of time in spreadsheet land, often to no end. In period 1, and also in the test period, the trial run, you'll have the same starting point. I have the simulation set so you can make a limited number of decisions and familiarize yourself with the software and experiment a bit initially. You'll be making 3 basic types of decisions. After the first round, I'll open it up so that you can make the full range of decisions available for you, but the first set of decisions are constrained to make it more manageable. So what decisions can you make at first? One is the marketing mix, and that would be for the 2 products that you currently have. Each team is inheriting 2 Sonites, and you'll be telling manufacturing how many to make, what price you want to put on them, and so forth. You'll also deploy your sales force. It's what Markstrat calls your commercial team, and we would think of it as a B2B sales force. They work for your company. They're calling on or selling to those retailers that I described earlier. And then the next thing you'll decide on is marketing research. You can access many types of reports, data, or studies. I would recommend in general that you obtain them. It's a cheap way, since it only costs Markstrat money, for you to get insight into what real marketing research looks like if you're not familiar with it. And then from a simulation perspective, it keeps you from making decisions in a way that's completely blind. Let's talk a little bit about production managing. Each period you indicate to manufacturing how many products to make. That means you have to forecast what you think demand is going to be, and you don't have to be perfect. Your manufacturing department will make the amount that you request, plus or minus 20% in response to actual demand. Let me give you a concrete example. On this slide, if we move from left to right and start at the top, this is an example of production request and actual demand and what happened subsequently. So you see in the upper left box your forecast of sales of 180,000, and let's say you have 30,000 of them in inventory. So with that, you would request 150,000 to be manufactured because you think you're going to sell 180. And you have 30 sitting in the warehouse, so you asked for 150. Let's say your actual sales turn out to be 154,000. So in that case, what manufacturing will do is decrease your request of 150,000 down to 124. Theoretically, they could have gone all the way down to 120, as that is minus 20%, the low end of the flexibility window. So they went down to 124 so that you could sell all 30,000 out of inventory and then actually meet the demand of 154,000. Now let's look at row 2. Let's say that you forecast 110,000, which is quite a bit less than the first one. So 110 forecast, your inventory is still 30,000. That means you request 80,000 of the products. But let's say that demand is really actually 154,000 again. So what your manufacturing team will do is increase manufacturing by 20%, but that's the most they can do. So 20% more of 80,000 is 96,000. So they made 96,000. Added to the 30,000, which you already had in inventory, that gave you 126,000 to sell, which is all that you sold, so you missed out on selling 28,000. And your inventory, again, at the end, is 0 since you sold them all. Finally, look at row 3. Let's say that you forecast a higher number. So 230,000 is your forecasted sales, and you still have 30,000 in inventory. So you ask production to make 200,000. Again, actual sales are 154,000. So what they'll do is decrease your request by 20%, and that takes it down to 160,000. So they make 160,000, you have 30,000 in inventory, but actual sales are, again, 154,000. So that means that your inventory at the end is now 36,000. In sum, you want to be vigilant about stocking out. That is, when you didn't make enough product. If you want to get a sense retrospectively of the sales you lost, you can look at purchase intentions, which is information you can get through marketing research, before the year, and then subtract what your actual market share ended up being, so you can estimate how many of those sales went to competitors. To make it concrete, imagine you went to Best Buy and were quite sure you wanted to buy the latest version of Bose headphones, but you arrive and they're all sold out. Your choice as a consumer is to buy something other than the Bose headphones, maybe a Samsung option, which is on the shelf there right now, and this is what a lot of people will do. Or you might wait and say, I'll buy them elsewhere, or wait until they're back in stock here. And some people do, but not everyone, because circumstances change. For instance, maybe you were planning to buy a car, and then a pandemic came along, and you thought, maybe I'll hold on to my money for now, and you never bought that car. So that's the concept of lost sales. Each year or period, you set what's called the retail price. The actual average retail price will vary depending on margins and discounts applied by channels. To decide on a price, you should watch the contribution it will generate and take into account distributors' margins, channel discounts, consumer expectations, and competitive prices. In Markstrat, the way that it works is you set a retail price, and that is the price that consumers pay. But Markstrat imposes a requirement that they call resale price maintenance, which means the manufacturer can set the price that the retailer charges. That particular situation is currently mostly illegal in the United States and has gone in and out of legality a couple of times over the past 100 years. But in a lot of places in the world, it is legal, and Markstrat is actually from Europe, and in a lot of Europe, it's legal. So you need to understand how this works, both from a practical, how do I do the simulation perspective, as well as from an international business perspective. This slide will give you a quick overview of how to approach pricing. Here we have a scenario where you specify a retail price of $400 per sonite, and they cost you $125 to make. We have 3 options or channels of where we're selling the product. Let's look first at specialty stores. You may know from your own lay experience as a consumer that they're less likely to discount the product. So, in effect, that means they're putting the product on the shelf at $400. And this is what you see in row 2, actual retail price $400. But they take 40%. That is, of the selling price, they hold on to $160. That means your price to the retailer is $240. Again, you specified a retail price of $400, but your company gets $240. Make sure you understand this. You specify the retail price, but your company gets $240. If they're costing you $125 to make, which is what Markstrat calls the transfer cost, it's the cost of manufacturing, what is the profit? Your profit is $115 in this scenario. Depending on the channel through which you sell the product, your profit comes out a little bit differently. So look down the mass merchandise column. You'll see that they discount 10% straight off their prices. These are the Walmarts of the world where the emphasis is on low prices. In this scenario, you specify a retail price of $400, but their actual retail price is $360. However, the manufacturer's margin is 30%, whereas at the specialty stores they took 40%, which works out to $108. That means you specified a retail price of $400, but you're selling it through mass merchandisers, and your actual selling price to the mass merchandiser is $252. Again, it still costs you $125 to make it, and your profit ends up being $127 per unit. Finally, the online stores are similar, but a little bit different. They take 5% off the top for discount. It's a little bit less than the mass merchandiser. They take 30% margin, and when you work through it, you get your price to the retailer at $266, and your profit on this channel would be $141. You will also specify your advertising, and you'll want to think about this in some detail. What are your goals? Maybe you want to build brand awareness, create a position in people's minds, and we'll talk about that some more subsequently. But depicted on the bottom panel of this slide is how the choice process looks. You pick your brand, specify how much you want to spend, and then select the group you're targeting from the segments we discussed previously. So are you targeting the explorers, the shoppers, etc.? You'll also specify the deployment of your sales force. You'll indicate how many people on your commercial team or sales force that you want to sell at which brand at which place, as you can see on the lower part of the slide. In this example, we are considering 2 brands, Soft and Solo. First, brand Soft. We're specifying 5 salespeople selling this brand Soft to call on specialty stores, 15 salespeople targeting mass merchandisers, and 10 to the online stores. Each period, you'll receive a budget, and you'll be able to see in real time as you're making decisions how much money you have left. Markstrat's manual gives more detail on this, but you'll always get a budget that's 40% of the previous year's profitability. And I have it set so there's a minimum of $7 million. So if you're having a terrible time of it, it doesn't matter. I'm made of money. I'm going to keep throwing cash at you so you'll get at least $7 million each year to spend. On the other hand, if you're performing well, at $20 million, I'm going to top you out, so you don't receive any more than $20 million. It's kind of like, as I mentioned, we're all part of the same corporation, and at some point, I want to pull money out of what you're doing and fund some other initiatives. You can also obtain loans and budget increases, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then this gives you the total available budget, and you'll be able to see how you're spending your money. Markstrat enables you to see your results in many different ways. It will give you a profit and loss statement, and this is what one looks like. This is a consolidated one. So you can see period over period your revenues, cost of goods sold, and so forth. Overall, you can obtain all kinds of detail of how you're performing. You can compare how is one particular brand performing relative to another. In the present example, the company has 5 brands running in both the sonite and the vodite market, and you can see where the profitability and the revenues are coming from. So now, are you ready to get started? Take the necessary time in round 1 to get familiar with Markstrat and your teammates. I recommend that you don't make any major changes in the first round. You'll also have the test round to try some things out. And now finally, we'll go over a bit of information about how to get started. You can sign in as a participant on stratxsimulations.com with your Participation Activation Key, or PAC. Once connected, you'll be able to click on the button Access Markstrat. Or you can connect directly to Markstrat using the login.markstrat.com URL. I'll post the PAC key and each individual's team, and you can take it from there. When you're in the site, your screen will look something like this. In the upper left screen, it says you are in period 0. This is where you start. You're going to want to think about this page in terms of columns. There's a main column heading across the top, which are Prepare, Company Results, Market and Competitive News, Marketing Research, and Decide. Prepare entails getting started. In almost all time periods, the columns you'll be interested in are Company Results, Market and Competitive News, Marketing Research, and the Decide options. Company Results is where you can access the financial reports, production reports, and details about what happened last period. As you recall, your team is taking over a company that was already operating, so you can see the results from last year. In the column called Market and Competitive News, there's some basic industry information that's always available. It's as though the teams are all publicly held or something along those lines, with corresponding types of general information available. And then if you want to, in the Marketing Research column, you can pay for different types of marketing research. In a few sessions, we'll talk about how to actually do that in more detail and what some of those different techniques will tell you. And then the far right column is important for everybody. This is where you actually make the choices. In the very first time period, you decide on the team identity. After that, the option disappears. But you're always going to be making decisions about the marketing mix, commercial team, and so on. The first time you log on, you'll be asked for your team name, so you should prepare. Your team name has to start with the first initial of your firm, so like Team S here, it should start with S and be up to 8 characters long. And you'll see in this screenshot, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little $sign. And that's always visible no matter what screen you're on. That $sign is there. What this means is you can check your budget anytime in real time. So just click on the little $sign and up will pop your budget, for instance. This is what you're authorized to spend on. Here's where you're spending it. Here's how much is left. It's quite convenient. And when you're done, you'll see again, up in the upper right-hand corner, certain messages that the system will generate for you. When you think that you're done with all of your decisions, you will want to check this. Markstrat will tell you if there's anything that it thinks are errors. And there are 2 types. Ones with the big round circle and the red X, which Markstrat thinks are a big problem. Then if there's a triangle with an exclamation point, they're more minor. Maybe you haven't specified something you're supposed to. As an example here on the screen, we see here the first error, brand soft marketing mix decisions are not made. Markstrat is telling you that you ignored that brand. Now, it could be that the team is pulling the brand off the market and they actually don't want to make any marketing mix decisions, so you can still enter your decisions and be done with these errors. But you definitely want to check in case you missed something. So that's it. Get ready, get set, and go. Now, one note is to please hit the time deadlines. If you do not submit your decisions by the deadlines, Markstrat will create them for you. And I can assure you that whatever you decide is almost certainly better than what Markstrat will do. Because it will do things like figure out that you have 2 brands, and so it will spend exactly 50% of your advertising money on each brand. Or it will take your sales force and it will put half the people on that sales force on one brand and half the people on the other. So please hit the deadlines. You'll be glad you did. I'm looking forward to seeing how you all perform.